Hello, and welcome to Knitsy Nails. I'm Amy, and I've been knitting for about 8 years and crocheting for almost 30. Today I want to discuss the concept of Franken patterning, or pattern mashing. Picture this. You're looking at a sock pattern that you really like. The stitch pattern is interesting, it'll work really well with the yarn that you want to use, and you're excited to get started. When you download the pattern, you see it uses an afterthought heel, but you know that a heel flapped gusset fits your feet better than any other type of short row heel. Or it's written cuff down, but you prefer toe up constructions. Take another example. You've checked out a stitch dictionary from your local library. You find a stitch pattern and you fall in love. You copy the chart down into your notebook, but you're not sure how to translate that chart into a specific project. Enter the Franken pattern. You can take pieces you like from multiple different patterns and mash them together into one project. With just a little bit of math, you can take the stitch pattern from one pattern and apply it to a different pattern that you know fits best. The first and easiest way to Franken pattern is to mash two existing patterns together, and there's a few options on how to do this. If your stitch counts are the same, say for a sock, both patterns have a total stitch count of 64, you can simply follow one pattern until you want to input the other, and then switch to the second pattern. You don't need to do any math, you can just switch from one pattern to the other. If the stitch counts are not the same, say one has 64 stitches and the other has 72, you can continue working your first pattern's increases until you reach the total number from the other. For example, if you're making toe-up socks, you can just continue increasing your toe until you reach 72 stitches instead of stopping at 64 like your first pattern instructs. At that point, you can just switch straight to your second pattern. For most sock patterns, you can also just follow the pattern but work it toe up instead of cuff down or vice versa. Just create your toe or your cuff the way that you like, and then input the stitch pattern for the leg and foot of your sock once you get to that point. So what if you're working from a stitch dictionary? These are incredible resources, and you can find all sorts of them listing all different types of stitches, from colorwork to lace to cables and beyond. You can also find similar charts all over the internet. These charts typically only contain one pattern repeat, but they'll let you know the stitch counts, row count, and any special stitches that you'll need to know. With that information, you can insert that chart onto any plain stockinette pattern that you'd like. Let's take these bumblebee socks that I made using a chart from the alternate stitch dictionary. The chart has a stitch count of 18 plus 1, meaning that the project needs to have a total stitch count that is a multiple of 18 plus 1. In my case, this meant that my socks had a total stitch count of 73. 72 is 18 times 4, plus 1 extra stitch. I used my standard wedge toe and a shadow wrap heel, then finished off with a few rows of 1x1 ribbing. While I have done a lot of pattern mashing with socks, there are a lot of other projects that you can do the same thing with. I find that a half pie shawl is an extremely easy base recipe that you can slot other patterns onto. Since you're not increasing every other row like you would be in a typical semicircle shawl, you don't have to worry about mathing your changed stitch counts very often. The way a half pie works is that you knit a set number of rows and then double your stitch count. Then you double the number of rows and then double your stitches. So, for example, you'll knit one row, then double your stitches, knit 2 rows, double your stitches, 4 rows, double, 8 rows, double, 16 rows, double, etc., etc., until it's as long as you'd like it to be. Since each row doubles the total stitch count, you can use stitch patterns with the same stitch repeat throughout. Hats are also very easy to Franken pattern. After your ribbing for bottom up, or your increases for top down, you have a pretty large area of plain stockinette to play with. You also have a lot more freedom on exactly how many stitches are in your hat. I have seen adult hat patterns going from 85 stitches around up to 130, depending on the yarn that's being used. So you have a lot more room to play around with. And of course, scarves are the easiest thing to Franken pattern with. You're just making a long rectangle, so as long as you cast on the correct number of stitches, you can just keep repeating your pattern over and over and over until you're done. You could also do a sampler scarf with multiple stitch patterns, just as long as the stitch counts are the same or multiples of each other. Diving a little deeper into stitch counts, like I said before, if your stitch counts are the same or multiples of each other, you can slot any stitch pattern that you'd like into any base recipe. On this rainbow half pie shawl, all of my stitch counts were multiples of 12. This means that I could slot in any stitch pattern with a stitch repeat count of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, or 12. Once I got to at least 24 stitches per row, I could use all of those multiples as well as 8, which opened it up so much. Most adult sock patterns will give you a total stitch count of either 64 or 72. 64 is divisible by 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32. 72 is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12, 18, and 36. So any stitch pattern that calls for any of those numbers of stitches can be slotted in with no problem at all. If your pattern calls for a multiple of some number, plus a few more, just increase your count by that second number, like I did for the bumblebee socks. Using these principles of Franken patterning, I created a roll for sock game. Right now, there's only a toe-up version because that is my personal preferred method of creating socks. It includes 6 toe types, 6 heel types, and 10 stitch patterns. However, you could easily slot in any stitch pattern you'd like into the base recipe. I've created this game for the socks that I'm knitting for Knit the Rainbow this year. Since the socks will be going to multiple different people, it's okay if the fit is different for each pair. While I'm intending Roll for Sock to be a fun game that anyone can use, it can also be used as just a quick reference guide for many different sock construction methods. Here is the first pair of socks that I'm making using Roll for Sock. I rolled for a blunt wedge toe. I rolled for a fleagle heel, but I have not yet gotten to the heel part yet. I'm still working on the foot. And then I got a slip stitch pattern with an elongated knit stitch. You can see here, there's that lovely slip stitch pattern going on. I'm super pleased with how this is working out. I'm using some yarn that I dyed in a double knit sock blank. And like I said, I'm really happy with how these are working out. It's got a really lovely texture, and it's easy enough to be relaxing, but still interesting because there is still something different that you're doing every 4 rows. Franken patterning or pattern mashing can seem really intimidating. I know when I posted those bumblebee socks onto a few different advanced sock knitting forums, there were some people there who have been knitting for longer than I have been alive, who said that they had never felt brave enough to mash different patterns together. It can feel like it won't work if you try to mash these patterns together, or you just aren't able to, you're not advanced enough to do it. But it is really quite simple. There's just a little bit of math involved, but it's not difficult at all. One of the best things about knitting is that it is infinitely customizable. With just a little bit of confidence, you too can create custom patterns with Franken patterning. Have you made a Franken pattern? Are you excited to try now that you know how easy it is? Do you have any other toe or heel types that you'd like to see enroll for sock? Please let me know down below. If this has given you the confidence to try some pattern mashing on your own, please consider giving it a like. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.